Welcome to episode 50 of Galaxy Tenants. On today's episode, we head to Vancouver Island for a conversation with Fred Penner, and we feature The Band Came Back by 5 Alarm Funk with special guest Fred Penner.
With a career that has spanned 50 years and has included 900 episodes of Fred Penner's Place on CBC over the course of 12 seasons, as well as a 4-year span on Nickelodeon's Nick Jr., reaching some 55 million viewers in America alone. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Mr. Fred Penner.
Yikes, yikes, you thunderous applause. Hey, thanks so much, Jay.
It's such a pleasure to have you. I'm so grateful for this conversation. Can you tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up in Winnipeg?
Well, I was born in 1946, so it was pretty wild in the prairie, the Canadian prairies. I was born in Winnipeg. I was a city boy. My parents were both raised in southern Manitoba, the province that I lived in. They're from Mennonite background. So I grew up with an understanding of the land. We would go back to visit many, many relatives who farmed in southern Manitoba. It was a beautiful time of exploring land, of understanding what growing things was. My dad was in the Canadian Army, so we lived in many different homes around Winnipeg as we waited to get into the we call the PMQs, or the permanent marriage quarters for the Army barracks in Winnipeg. So I went to many, many different schools in my elementary years in particular. 6 different elementary schools from kindergarten to grade 6.
What was that like, moving around so much over such a short amount of time? I mean, were you changing friends and having to adjust to new places? That had to be difficult for a kid.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was difficult. And an interesting part of this, as I've looked back and seen how my career has evolved. And one of the things that happened, and I really don't know whether this has anything to do with the ultimate direction, but often we would move late summer, early fall. So I'd be starting a new school weeks after, the kids had already established their friendships. So I'd start in late September, maybe early October. And I remember a number of times my mom taking me to the school, going to the principal's office, principal, talking to me, walking down the hallway to my new classroom, going into the class. Immediately, all these eyes, 20, 30 kids are focused on me. I go stand in front of this maze of young children, and the teacher would say to the class, boys and girls, this is Freddie Penner. Please make him welcome. And I would stand there, and they would say, yeah, come and sit over here, come and sit over here. So I would have, it was sort of like an audience in a way, just standing in front of these kids. But it was challenging, I think, going to different schools in that time and different friendships that were formed. They were sporadic. Not until grade 7, I was in the same school for grade 7 to 9 and 10 to 12. Yeah, it was a good upbringing, very open, very free, out on my bike, playing with my friends, lots of exploring, lots of discovery, lots of really, really beautiful experiences.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have an older brother and sister, 9 and 10 years older, respectively. And I have a younger brother who is 8 years younger than I, and a younger sister, Susie, who was born with Down syndrome. And she was obviously the youngest of the family. My mom was having kids over a long span. She didn't have Susie, my sister, until she was 43, I think mom was. So the odds of Down syndrome arriving are very high when you're over 40 for women. But yes, there were 5 of us in the family. I was the middle child.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your early work with troubled youth and kind of how you gained the direction that you ended up going.
Yeah, I think the main direction for my career path was inspired by Susie because she was nonverbal. She had a series of grunts and points and sounds that she would make that would let us know exactly what her needs were. And she loved music, and she and I would listen to the record player. She could put the record onto onto the spindle, put the needle on. We listened to the soundtrack from West Side Story, was one of our all-time favorite things. And it would bring us both to absolute delight. And she would start crying at one point with some of those just amazing Bernstein melodies. So I remember as a teen, preteen, watching that happen and being a little shocked by it. I felt music in me from the music that my parents listened to, that my older brother and sister listened to. There were some just really wonderful sounds that I was absorbing and imitating, because I had a pretty good musical ear. But with Susie, the emotional part of that was a new experience for me. So I thought, okay, this is what music is capable of doing for anybody, specifically for Susie, in her world. So as my life grew, I didn't start playing guitar till I was 15. I went through high school in my university days, and I started working at a couple of they're called residential treatment centers, which were with seriously disturbed and challenged kids. One was called Children's Home of Winnipeg. That was basically a group home for schizophrenic, for psychotic, for autistic children. And I was a glorified house parent, really. We do things with the kids, but I really had no training specifically for that kind of work. I would hardly think of it as an occupation because it wasn't what I was really focused on ultimately. And then I worked at another school called Knoll School for Boys, which was not as much disturbance, but a lot of behavior problem, kids from broken homes, acting out, fighting all the time. It was really a very, very challenging time. But I found that they did relate to music. So I'd bring my guitar and we'd sit in the corner, and they would love to hear some of the most sensitive songs, which I found a lovely juxtaposition from the kind of angst that they were going through as children. So they would ask for things like Mr. Bojangles, not something hard and rocking, which you think might be more in keeping with their anger, but they wanted something a little gentler that told an interesting story. And so I used music, in I suppose in a therapeutic way with those kids, and I learned certainly a lot about how difficult their lives were, and just a sensitivity for children. That obviously stayed with me forever until late in the 70s, when my career path went from playing bars and universities, and it focused in on working with children.
Some of my earliest musical memories are of you climbing out of that log and picking up and playing your guitar. I recall an episode where Holly joined you on dulcimer for Wabash Cannonball. Then moments later, she's running through aspects of the French horn. And I can't help but think that your show likely played a large part in my immense love of music. I play a variety of stringed instruments. I do music for a living. I book events and concerts and music festivals.
Oh, good for you.
And it had such an impact on me.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the importance of music in early childhood development? And I know we just touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if we can speak more generally about it.
Sure. A phrase I often use in interview is children are sponges. They learn by observing and imitating. So if you give them, some beautiful music to touch their spirit, their soul, their ears, their emotions, then you are planting the seed truly in them for future appreciation of music. They often say that music is sort of a natural part of our humanity, and it often comes from the pulse of the heart. We are in pulse constantly. There are the vibrations, the patterns that guide our lives are there, whether we are aware of them or not. is something else. But children it's so amazing how they can create sound in a blink. They can create a little musical pattern, a little rhyming pattern. That's where skipping rhymes come from. The Mother Goose rhymes. It gives an awareness of pattern in life. And so when you can combine a lyric pattern with a musical pattern, then you've got a song. And I just watched children, and have for all these decades, just getting into something that I'm doing and adapting it themselves in their own lives. That's probably one of the highest compliments that I've had along the way, is where a song that I've written about something important to me, like you can do it if you try, just a basic encouragement. Get out there and give it a shot. You may not succeed, but if you don't try, then you will never know, kind of thing. So I love finding ways of offering that to the listening audience, that here's a song that I wrote because it was important to me, because I looked at it from my childhood and I thought, I remember that being a message that either was or could have been important to me when I was younger. Here's a song that I'm offering to you to try and encourage that same feeling.
What are some of the challenges that children face today as you see them, relative to maybe when I was a child or when you were a child?
Oh, we've changed. We've turned so many sad and tragic corners along the way. I think with the technologies that are inundating our society, the biggest challenge that not just children but humanity, but particularly children, because they're just growing, is learning how to communicate on a face-to-face basis. To sit down with somebody, tell them how they are feeling, sharing moments that aren't part of the technology. Something really simple and beautiful. I live on an island on the west coast of Canada, Vancouver Island, and I'm surrounded by trees and flowers, natural beauty. It's a half an hour drive to one of the most gorgeous beaches and oceans in the planet. I've learned to, and maybe I've always had it, I don't know. I appreciate really simple things. It sounds trite, but the beauty of a flower, the magic of planting a seed and seeing it grow into something spectacular. Those kinds of things are really vital for the child to experience. Things that do touch them emotionally. It's all about the emotions. And obviously teaching them the values of life, like tolerance and acceptance and understanding and respect and humility, really fundamental things that challenge them as individuals to be the best person they can possibly be, in spite of the insanity and stupidity that's happening in the world.
Do you find it hard to be encouraged, or do you take joy in those simple things and that kind of outweighs some of the heaviness that we're dealing with in the world? How do you process some of the heavy stuff?
Oh, I'm challenged. I've always been such a truly positive person. I believe in my ability to create something that I can put out there, and how people respond to it is something else. I trust myself. I believe in myself. As I'm now into my 70s, and seeing truly the world crumbling in so many ways, with the hate, with the violence, with the war. It is so disheartening, because part of me has always believed that people will learn from their mistakes. People will be able to find a way of creating a balance that is positive in their lives. And just the way it's going right now, I'm struggling. I still believe in those values, of respect and humility and honesty and love. Those are all key, and I keep pushing those out. And I can only hope that the children of this world, the people who listen to their souls, to their spirit, are able to pass that on to the next generation. But it is a huge challenge right now.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for the same. And I find myself struggling often
Yeah,
when I'm watching what's going on.
yeah.
But it makes me even more grateful for people like you outputting the positives because it really
Thank
helps
you.
counterbalance. Traveling around the world to places like Africa, what were some of the similarities that you saw among children from different communities and different backgrounds?
I mean, the similarity is the delight in sound, the delight in play, because so much of what we do, I mean, as a musician, I am physically playing, an instrument, but there's a different level of play. It's and that other level is based in curiosity and in encouraging the child to discover something a little bit different. One of the things I did in Africa with one of the beautiful children that I played with, I'm playing my guitar, I'm doing a blues pattern, and then I sort of pulled back on the pattern a bit, and then I did a hard hit, and the child goes, oh, was just scared by it by a little bit, and then it became an anticipation of my, like peekaboo kind of thing, right? So we had a little spontaneous game happening like that. There was another child about 8, 9 years old who the men in this particular village were, most of them were gone. HIV/AIDS had taken them. So it was women raising children, or in some cases, children, older children raising children. Those were, I mean, very hard things to observe. But there was this one beautiful boy. I was just talking to him, playing with, and we were kibitzing, and then I said, "Oh, put your foot on the top of my foot. I'll hold your hand. Put your other foot on the top of my other foot, and then when I move my feet, then your legs move, and we can walk around like that." Which is something that I've done with all of my kids along the way. But it's a dad thing. It's more a dad thing than a mom thing. Moms are busy, with so much other stuff. But this was a dad play, and he had never done that before. And it was, whoa, this is the best. And seeing that and feeling that from him just gave me, well, I mean, it was emotional for me to experience that. But there is the commonality with children. Children love to play, whatever it is, any kind of a game. You bring them into a musical pattern, they are ready to absorb again, to learn what's around them, and that doesn't change. The beauty of the child doesn't change anywhere. Their physical environment and what they go through is going to affect what their personality is, and how they perceive the world, and how they get what they need to survive, which can be very, very tragic along the way. But children are children, no matter where on this planet they are.
My dad used to do that as well, where I'd walk on his feet or I'd run up his legs and kind of do a little like backflip kind of thing. I remember
Yes,
doing that.
exactly.
I haven't really thought about that since I was a kid. Thank you for
Oh,
that.
sweet.
Thank
Good.
you for jogging my mind. Decades later, I still hear the theme song for Fred Penner's Place in my head, and it's a wonderful song.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of producing the show?
It was a godsend. I had been touring. I put on my first album, The Cat Came Back, in 1979. It instantly became a favorite for a lot of families. It was, the timing was right for that. There were 3 performers in Canada, myself, a fellow named Raffi, and Sharon Lawson Bram. We were sort of the big 3, doing our work across Canada. And first record came out in 1979. And because the post-war, the boomers, that generation, were now having kids, one of the largest demographics in history, were having their own children and demanding quality entertainment for their kids. So I was putting out the albums. We all were doing 2,000-seat theaters on a regular basis. It was huge. The energy was massive. Festivals started growing across the country. Children's festivals where acts from every corner of the planet would converge, on a number of different cities in Canada, particularly. And so the Canadian audiences were being inundated with this wonderful range of exploration and discovery. And unbeknownst to me, CBC had been following my career. They were, based in Toronto. They had people out in the industry watching new artists coming in. And one day I received a phone call from Dodie Robb, was her name, the head of children's television in that time, mid 80s. And she said, "We're looking for someone to do a new TV series." There was a show in Canada called The Friendly Giant. And I was going to be the replacement for The Friendly Giant. And so I said, "Well, what do I do? What do you want me to do?" And she said, "Well, what would you like to do? I'm putting it in your lap, basically." And so I'm thinking, what would I like a series to be? I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want it just to be a knock on a door and, come on in kind of thing. It needed to be that journey of travel, of excitement, of discovery. So I eventually developed the concept of a natural environment with an entry point through a hollow log. That was my dream. And sure enough, they were able to create it into this beautiful natural environment, with as much as styrofoam and artificial moss can do. It looked pretty good. It was a pretty neat series.
Yeah, it really looked great. I mean, as a kid, I just assumed that was a real place. And as an adult, I haven't spent much time thinking about it, but I kind of was still under the impression that place might exist and you could give us the location so I could go hang out there.
Coordinates: 49 north, 27 south. Yeah, exactly. I wish that I could do that. I do. A lot of people, I mean, people found the log to be such an iconic thing. What the log did for me, which was really vital, was it created a safe entry point into another world. And in a time where safety was important for me, for the child. So virtually they would essentially crawl through the log with me, and then we'd be on the other side. And you could only get there if you knew the path, if you knew that journey. And that was something I learned in Cubs and Scouts, learning how to mark a trail, that kind of thing. And getting into Fred Penner's place and having it an environment where I could invite such a range of friends, from Holly to, I mean, it was a huge range of, one of my favorite performers was Tom Chapin. Harry Chapin's brother did a couple of episodes, and man, he's a gem. But every performer that came on gave of themselves to the show and brought, and they weren't children's entertainers for the most part. They were just really good musicians or singers, opera singers. And so it was that very intelligent, I think, level of musicality and exploration that the child would see and say, "Oh, this is not just a little thing of 3 chords. This is a much bigger world of music that is being offered to me." So I've had lots of wonderful feedback, as you were saying, that it perhaps affected your appreciation of music. And I'm so honored to hear that. Thank you.
In addition to your show, I used to watch Mr. Dress Up. Did you
good.
ever work with Ernie at all?
Yes, Ernie Coombs and we did a number of things together, a couple of festivals, some performances, and he and I performed on his series. I did a number of episodes there, and he came on my show a couple of times as well, which I'm not sure if you saw that.
I probably saw it, but I was so young that I have just like little blips of memories of certain episodes. For me, I always recall your show and his show as 2 separate things, and it would have probably blown my mind had I seen those 2 worlds collide.
It was in a way, when people asked me, like, what were the most memorable shows that you did? And inevitably I go to one of the Mr. Dress Up episodes, because about 3 weeks prior to doing the episode, Ernie and his wife were in downtown Toronto, and it was a beautiful summer day, and they were shopping. And at one point, Ernie's wife said, "Ernie, I'm going to go outside and, just take in the sunshine. Well, and Ernie said, that's great. I've got one more thing I want to pick up. I'll meet you outside. In that time frame, a cab driving down one of the streets in Toronto lost control, jumped the curb, and killed his wife. And it was, I mean, instant. And we heard about it very soon, and we called Ernie and offered our condolences and said, we're so deeply sorry for your loss, and if you need to cancel the show, that's totally fine. And he said no, that he and his wife had talked about it, and he was looking forward to doing the show. So he came on the episode, and it was when he came on set, Studio 41 in Vancouver, because we did shows in Winnipeg and Vancouver, and he comes on set, and the love that just poured to him from the cast, or from the crew rather, was palpable. And then we started doing our show, and the heavy part of this was the last song that we did on that episode, which we had sung, we'd learned, we'd shared. I didn't really think about the impact of that song until we started singing it, and we both felt the same thing. The song was "Together Tomorrow." And Tom Chapin, I learned it through him, and Judy Collins. And it's together tomorrow, my friend. Tonight when I'm sleeping, I'll dream of us being together tomorrow again. And, and we're both sitting there outside of the log, breathing through it and trying not to just, crumble into each other's arms. But we felt that emotional intensity was the highest point that I ever reached on that program.
The dedication on his end and the follow through, given the circumstances and something like that, is truly incredible.
I couldn't believe it.
I really loved what he did. He was really fantastic, and I just remember being so fond of his show as a kid, much like yours. Yeah,
he was the real deal. And he worked with Fred Rogers, as I'm sure you know, Butternut Square, out of Pittsburgh. Well, Ernie was born in Pittsburgh, and that's where he met Fred Rogers, and they began their career. And his Ernie's story, Mr. Dress Up story, is stellar. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I was so fortunate to see him in a live setting. I think it was one of my first concerts. Yeah, it was like that in Sesame Street Live.
Mr. Johnson had troubles of his own. He had a yellow cat who wouldn't leave his home. He tried and he tried to give the cat away. He gave it to a man going far, far away. But the cat came back the very next day. The cat came back. They thought he was a goner, but the cat came back. He just couldn't stay away. Give me a meow. Go.
How does one go about popularizing a song from the 1800s, like The Cat Came Back? And how does that song get on your radar?
It was a coincidence, as things tend to be. There was, I don't know if you remember, you're certainly not in your generation, but a singer by the name of Sonny James. And he was a musician in a country style in the 50s. And he did a major version of The Cat Came Back, sort of in a bluegrass form. Cat came back the very next day, cat came back, almost hillbilly, hokey kind of thing. And I remembered that song, and it was great fun to listen to. And then one day in, I think, 1978, my younger brother, Terry, and a cousin of mine, David, the three of us were sitting jamming, and I bought a couple of folk song encyclopedias, Jerry Silverman, Volume 1, Volume 2, and I'm flipping through Volume 2. We're just trying to find a song to jam with, to play with. And I turned the page, The Cat Came Back. Oh, I remember that. Is that the same thing? And then, oh no, it's E minor, D, C, B7. This is a minor pattern. It's a very common minor pattern. Hit the Road Jack is the same groove. And we started jamming on it, and it was, this is a perfect jamming song. And then you start looking at the verses, and they're violent, but there's always this payoff at the end. The incredible things can happen to the cat, and then he still comes back. And I I did some research on it and went back to the early religious revivals in Northeast United States, and the Chautauquas that came out of that, the traveling caravan that would pull into a town, and the side would flop down, and you'd have an orator, do recitations from Shakespeare or Charles Dickens, and a guy would come and sell you snake oil, for whatever, and then the minstrels would come out and they would sing "The Cat Came Back." Anyway, so it came into my purview, and it clearly needed to be the signature tune for my first album.
I wonder what the person would have thought when they wrote it, had they known how much mileage would come of this song, including you recently recorded a play on "The Cat Came Back" titled "The Band Came Back" with Five Alarm Funk. I've hosted them at a music festival in British Columbia one time called Element Music Festival, and we had them there, and I was lucky enough to see them once at Burning Man.
Were they there?
Yeah, they played at a live, there's a live stage there that does all live music, mainly Canadian music. And right after the festival where we had hosted them in British Columbia, we went to Burning Man, and by chance we're wandering around, and here's Five Alarm Funk out on the playa. It was really amazing. But can you tell me how that kind of came together with those guys? Their
management is I've been connected with with them for years, and we've crossed paths at different events along the way. So Teo Branson, one of the main dudes, we had talked about doing some collaboration. The possibility was there. So I thought, well, yeah, this is COVID time. I'm doing lots of virtual concerts. I'd love to have something else that I could work on. And so we just started talking, and they took that on as a project for the band, and they went in and they created essentially the track for it, and sent that to me, and I listened to it. I thought, well, it's not the usual form of "The Cat Came Back." It's obviously has something more to it. So the lyric needed to change, and of course, in relation to the COVID world, that was the idea, was to try and bring in what musicians are going through now, and the idea that someday the band will come back. Anyway, so I started playing with it, and we back and forth the number of times, and I said, can we do this? Can we pull that? Oh yeah, can we add a little section where there's a breakdown? Well, the bass came back and the drums came back, et cetera, et cetera. So we worked on the arrangement together. I did the lyrics. I encouraged them to sing along on the choruses, which they don't normally do, but we played with it, and it's now out there somewhere in the ether.
One of the funkiest songs I've heard you output.
Satisfy the soul until they shut down every date and every gig across the nation, beyond our control. So we pulled back, tried to figure out a new direction to keep us in the flow of entertainment. There's nothing we could do to find our way through this great unknown. And the band came back the very next year. The band came back. They thought that we were goners, but the band came back. Just couldn't stay away. So we're stressed out, and we let the music play with our emotions, hoping that the tunes we created would grow to see the light of day. We are dreamers, following the mystery of music, waiting to revive imagination with melodies that swing and sway. And the band came back the very next year. The band came back.
and guitars came back, and the horns came back, and the band came back. Yeah, the band came back. Yeah, the band came back. The band came back the very next year. The band came back. They thought that we were goners, but the band came back. Just couldn't stay away. Yeah, the band came back. The band came back. The band came back. Just couldn't stay away. The band came back. The band came back. Yeah, the band came back. Just couldn't stay away.
Mr. Penner, when you look back at your 50-year career, and we mentioned the episode with Mr. Dressup, but what moments do you reflect on most fondly?
They're very small. I think it goes back to the appreciation of the little things. Moments like I was in Edmonton once upon a time, and there were like 2,000 people at the Jubilee Auditorium, and I had a follow spot on, a big follow spot head to floor on me, and I had instructed the lighting crew to, as the cat came back is coming to an ending, iris down to my head, and then I'll do a final one, and you take it out, So it was a fun effect, and so he's doing that cat, meow, meow, meow there, and the kid up in the loge says, "Nice work, Fred Penner." Zip. It was just a perfect little capper to that. There was a moment in Halifax, the number of children with Down syndrome who came to performances along the way, that any connection with special needs children always became the high point of any performance. When I was signing autographs, a child would come up and we'd have a hug, we'd have whatever, but it would be such a personal one-on-one moment kind of thing. But the story I just want to relate quickly is one of the conferences, the Down syndrome conferences, was in Halifax years ago. And this was quite early in my career. And I'm on this little stage in a little hotel in their banquet room. There's maybe a couple hundred people and 30, 40 children with Down syndrome. I start singing, and the kids are coming closer. They're coming closer. The stage was not high off the ground, and there were little stairs to come up. And suddenly they started coming up on stage. And suddenly I am literally surrounded by Susie, by my sister. And I was overcome, and I started crying. I'm still trying to sing, but I'm crying. And the kids are saying, "It's okay. It's going to be okay. You're okay." And so they gave me, strength to just carry through that. And it wasn't out of sadness. It was out of truly an ultimate joy because of what Susie had given me and what these children were now giving me. So, I mean, those, and there's literally hundreds of little moments like that along the way that have fortified my appreciation of the philosophy: never underestimate your ability to make a difference in the life of a child. Please.
Mr. Penner, you've inspired a lot of people, myself included. I will forever be grateful to you for that. And I consider this conversation with you to be one of the greatest pleasures of my life. So thank you so much for doing this.
You are a gem.
Thank you for listening to Galaxy Tenants. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. For early access to episodes and exclusive content, check us out on Patreon. Also, if you'd like to communicate with us, send us an email to galaxytenants@gmail.com or leave a voicemail on the Galaxy Tenants hotline at 303-550-2065.